Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio this afternoon is Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands. And at question number 1, I call Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government what engagement its Marine Directorate has undertaken to progress any plans to reopen a boat-based cockle fishery on the Solway Firth.
Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Marine Directorate of the Scottish Government has been considering a proposal it received for a Solway cockle scientific trial using fishing vessels. During portfolio question time on the 10th September 2025 on this matter, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands assured Mr Carson that a discussion would be arranged with him once further information had been received from the Marine Directorate, and steps are currently being taken to arrange that meeting.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Minister for his response. He'll no doubt know the Solway Firth has long been recognised as one of Scotland's most productive shellfish areas, with a rich history of cockle fishing that has supported generations of coastal communities. In my region, the potential reopening of a vessel-based cockle fishery represents not only an opportunity to revive a once thriving industry, but the chance to deliver sustainable economic growth in a region that faces persistent challenges around rural employment and depopulation. I have worked with local scientists and stakeholders over the last few years, and it's clear that a well-managed boat-based fishery could deliver environmental safeguards, traceability and economic resilience, all while respecting the unique ecology of the Solway. With that in mind, can the Minister agree to meeting with me and the Cabinet Secretary and stakeholders to accelerate the process to see that economic benefit realised sooner rather than later?
Minister.
Mr Carson has been pursuing this issue for a number of years now, or certainly a very long time as far as I'm aware, and I spoke to the Cabinet Secretary before she went away on her trip. And what I've been told is that, as well as the arrangement has been made for the Cabinet Secretary to meet with Mr Carson, officials from the Marine Directorate intend to reconvene a meeting with the party that put forward the cockle proposal and the relevant fishers. Opening a fishery is not a straightforward or quick process, and there are aspects of the proposal presented that require some clarification. But arrangements are currently being made for such a meeting that Mr Carson has asked for, and I know that officials and the Cabinet Secretary will keep Mr Carson updated as that develops.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when information on farming payments will be publicly available in accordance with Section 19 of the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Act 2024.
Minister.
Scottish ministers are currently co-developing the approach to future agricultural support, and our agricultural reform route map will continue to update farmers and crofters on the changes. In relation to the ARC Act, the Rural Support Plan will set out the intended agricultural reform and the use of the Act. Our future approach to reporting on the publication of support information will be part of the aforementioned co-development process. In the meantime, the Rural Support Simplification and Improvement Data Publication Scotland Regulations 2025 will allow us to continue publishing information relating to payment recipients.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Minister for that reply? I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary as far back as the 21st of June last year, seeking clarity and a timetable on this. I raised it in Parliament with the Minister on the 7th of May of this year, who told me, in his words, it's a complex issue. But it is not a complex issue, it's a straightforward issue. It is simple. Is the government on the side of secrecy or on the side of transparency? On the side of concealment or openness? When will it enact legislation passed by Parliament over a year ago so that it is a matter of public record just exactly who is in receipt of the £660 million of public money which is paid out through the farm payment system?
Minister.
I dispute the position that Richard Leonard takes, that we are doing anything other than being open and transparent. I would suggest that data will be published annually by the 30th of June of the year following the financial year end. It will remain publicly accessible for 2 years from the date of publication. In addition, the Scottish Government publications must be approved by the Information Commission Office. So we're doing anything other than trying to hold information back.
Thank you. I've requested for 2 supplementaries. I'll take both. First, Christine Graham, and obviously all supplementaries have to be supplemental to the question on the business bulletin. Ms Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I know the Minister recently had a meeting in farrowing crates, so would the Minister consider using rural payments to support animal welfare improvements, such as transitioning from farrowing crates to free farrowing?
And indeed, the question on the Business Bulletin relates to the publicly available nature of information on whatever the farming payments are made to promote. So with that in mind, Minister, please respond to Ms Graham.
Certainly, Presiding Officer. As the member has just talked about, I recently stated at the Alternative Farrowing Systems Roundtable discussion that I chaired here in Parliament, once a definitive direction as to what will replace farrowing crates is determined, we will then consider what options are available. So we will continue to listen and work with the industry and key stakeholders on how best to achieve the improvements in animal welfare, as well as monitoring industry information to allow us to determine how to ensure best practice is delivered.
Thank you, Minister. I'm not entirely sure that related to the question on the Business Bulletin, but moving on to supplementary from Mr Halker-Johnson. Hopefully this might be closer to the mark.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I remind the Chamber of my register of interest as a partner in a farming business in receipt of farming payments and a member of NFUS. It was reported in the Scottish Farmer and the Government's Farming Future Investment Scheme has been heavily oversubscribed, with over 3,000 farms, including our own, applying to the £14 million scheme. Can I ask the Minister what consideration the Scottish Government is giving to NFUS calls to increase funding for the scheme in 25-26, and when will the offer of grants and payments to those farms that accept the offers start being made?
Thank you, Minister. Again, if we could relate all these supplementaries to the actual question on the Business Bulletin, that would be really helpful, including with regard to the Minister's responses. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to get that somewhere in relation to the question that was originally asked. We will make publicly aware the amount of money that is going to be delivered via the Farming Investment Scheme as farmers get that information, and we will hopefully publish that information at the time.
Thank you, Minister. Question number 3 has not been lodged. Question number 4, Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last engaged with the UK Government on domestic food and drink markets.
Minister.
The Scottish Government has consistently urged successive UK Government to safeguard our domestic market and ensure fair competition for producers. However, recent trade deals, especially those affecting beef, sheep and dairy, have exposed Scottish farmers to increased risk amid rising costs and in an uncertain trade environment. Meanwhile, meaningful collaboration between the Government and industry is vital to assess those trade impacts and to protect domestic producers. It is therefore deeply concerning that the current UK Government shows only limited ministerial engagement on trade issues, despite the devolved nature and shared economic interests of many aspects.
Emma Harper.
Thank the Minister for that response. Farmers have warned that our food security is under serious threat due to the UK Government decision to scrap Skilled Worker Code 5111, which effectively blocks farms from hiring skilled overseas workers. This leaves pig, poultry, dairy and horticultural producers struggling to fill vital jobs. In Dumfries and Galway, more than 25 dairy farms depend on staff from the Philippines and other nations to keep operations running. Does the Minister agree with me that this is yet another example of a UK Government that is ignorant of and does not care about the needs of Scotland's farmers?
Minister.
Well, it's quite clear that the UK immigration system no longer meets the needs of our economy, our public services or our communities. Scotland urgently requires a tailored migration routes, such as the rural visa pilot, to reflect our distinct needs. Labour shortages in the food and drink sector stem largely from Brexit, which led to the departure of many EU citizens and the loss of vital skills. The UK Government's removal of Skilled Worker Code 5111 has worsened that situation, severely hindering recruitment of overseas talent in sensitive sectors like pig, poultry and dairy, making it unnecessarily difficult to fill essential roles and to support industry sustainability. Indeed, as the member is aware, an article in yesterday's Farmer's Guide by Alexandra Kupriak on yesterday, 29th September, warns that the UK food security is at risk following the decision to remove Skilled Worker Code 5111, taking skilled roles off the temporary shortage list. Now, that is despite maintaining it for builders. I would argue that folk working in the pig, poultry or dairy or processing are skilled enough to keep food on our plates, so we should have a scheme that would allow us to bring visas to bring them to Scotland.
Question number 5, Liam Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Agriculture Minister has had with the Justice Secretary regarding support for farmers in relation to rural crime.
Minister.
I have not spoken directly to Justice Ministers about rural crime. Clearly, issues such as machinery and livestock theft have a hugely detrimental effect on Scotland's rural communities, including our hard-working farmers and crofting sector. Now, there's a wide range of rural organisations, including the National Farmers Union for Scotland, are represented within the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime, or SPARC, alongside Police Scotland. The SPARC aims to prevent, reduce and tackle rural crime activity, and in association with local partnerships is seen as a success story in combating rural crime. The Scottish Government is a member of SPARC and fully supportive of its work.
Liam Kerr.
I think farmers will be surprised and disappointed at the Minister's lack of action on this, since, according to NFU Mutual, the cost of rural crime in Scotland increased by 34.9% in 2022 to 23, cost the Scottish economy £1.2 million last year. Now, around 2.7 million of quad bikes and all-terrain vehicles were stolen in the last year, and just last month, 5 of those were stolen in Aberdeenshire, possibly from the same outfit. So, what specific actions will this Minister and/or his Justice colleagues do to prevent North East farmers suffering rural crime, and when will they see results?
Minister.
I very much take on board the point that Liam Kerr makes. Farm theft is a heinous crime. It really takes away the working tools of a working farmer, and I accept that. But there are a number of things that farmers can do for themselves to protect their own vehicles, such as blocks in the ground, such as the spray paint. As I've already stated, the Scottish Government is a member of SPARC, and we continue to work with the industry to make sure that they've got all the information they need to protect their own businesses.
Supplementary, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Previously, the Minister for Victims and Community Safety admitted that the SNP government missed an LCM on a rural theft bill passed by a previous Conservative government. And in light of recent news that Liam Kerr talks about rising cost of quad bike theft in Scotland, then does Jim Fairley accept that the SNP's significant oversight on this issue has left farmers and rural businesses like mine in the Scottish borders much worse off?
Minister.
No, I would defy that point. I would say that the Scottish Government has done everything in its power to make sure that the Scottish rural communities are protected and supported at every turn.
Move on to question 6. Megan Gallagher.
To ask the Scottish Government what long-term action it will take to support farmers growing malted barley.
Minister.
I am very aware that Scottish arable producers face significant challenges right now, including volatile markets and extreme weather. And that's why the Scottish Government continues to provide that certainty through direct support via the Basic Payment Scheme, as set out in our Vision for Agriculture, which is in stark contrast to the current and past UK governments. This year, the Scottish Government has launched its Future Farming Investment Scheme, offering at least £14 million to accelerate change in Scottish agriculture and support the Government's vision. With 7,500 applications received, Scotland's farmers and crofters have shown strong commitment to the key outcomes like emissions reductions and nature restoration.
Megan Gallagher.
The Minister will be aware that farmers growing malting barley have faced challenges this year, including a difficult harvest, falling prices, increased production costs and a reduced demand from the Scotch whisky industry. Worryingly, challenges facing the industry are anticipated to be long-term and affect farmers for years to come. Will the Scottish Government commit to increasing farm payments to compensate farmers for the losses that they are incurring? And will the Scottish Government liaise directly with the Scotch whisky industry to make sure that arable farmers are supported?
Minister.
I very much take on board the points that Megan Gallagher makes to me, but what I would say is that we continuously engage not only with the Scotch Whisky Association but the Scottish agricultural community. In fact, the First Minister was in the White House making sure that he was representing the Scotch Whisky Association to get the very best deal possible. That should feed back into the Scottish industry. As far as the funding is concerned, I will reiterate that this is a government which has made sure that we keep direct payments in place. That's given the security that farmers need in Scotland.
Question number 7, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether the existing conditions and regime which seek to protect inshore fishing from the impacts of any loss of fishing grounds due to the seabed installation of cables for and the construction of offshore wind installations required to be reformed in order to provide full compensation for any loss of fishing revenue as a result of having to avoid an area of a quarter of a nautical mile from any such cables.
Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government very much values its fisheries sector and recognises the need to address fishers' concern in relation to offshore wind development. We want a prosperous future for both sectors. In relation to fishing over cables, fishers should continue to use their expert judgment and knowledge to guide where it is that they fish. However, I agree that it's right to explore this matter, and the Cabinet Secretary has asked officials to work with SOEC, the Barriers to Deployment Group, which brings both sectors together, to consider solutions and report back to her.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, East Coast inshore fishermen are seeing valuable fishing grounds lost because they can't fish within a quarter of a nautical mile over any seabed cabling to offshore wind installations. In the headlong dash for offshore wind projects, some apparently with little discernible benefit directly to Scotland, the fishermen are simply not getting the compensation they deserve. Now, the SNP stood up for our fishermen for half a century. Could I ask the Minister, will the Scottish Government now stand up for them by instigating an independent review to consider how our fishermen get a fair deal from their own government?
Minister.
Well, I think I'm going to dispute the fact that they said that they cannot fish over cables, because my understanding is there is no specific exclusion of fishing activities over or near a submarine cable, but it is an offence for fishers to wilfully or negligently damage cables or pipelines. In terms of the position that he asked for, will there be an independent? There is already a cross-government, cross-industry sector looking at all the issues which Fergus Ewing has raised, and that will be taken forward when the Cabinet Secretary returns.
Supplementary, Rosa Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In committee this morning, we heard from fishing stakeholders who say that everyone knows the value of oil and gas and the renewables industries, but decision makers often forget about the economic value of fishing. So we need to plot the areas where fishing occurs and factor that in when we're planning for new developments. We desperately need a spatial plan for our seas. And can I ask the Minister when the Scottish Government is going to bring that forward?
Minister.
Well, I'm not privy to the conversations that were had this morning, and I'm sorry, I've completely forgotten the question that Rhoda Grant asked. I was reading something else. Could you ask it again, please?
No, we don't go backwards. We don't go backwards. I'm afraid, Ms Grant, that the Minister, given he can't now recall your question, will probably wish to agree to write to the member, and indeed all members, to say what his answer would have been if he had remembered the question. Minister, is that an undertaking?
I'm happy to answer the question if the member...
No, we don't go back and repeat questions, Minister. Okay. So I take it, is the Minister going to respond to the Chamber with his answer in writing? Thank you. Supplementary, Willie Rennie.
The truth is that fishermen are increasingly being squeezed out of prime fishing grounds. Now, NNG Wind Farm agreed compensation for the static and the mobile gear. That's what they agreed to do. But the wind farms since then are only given compensation for the statics, the creel fishermen. So will the Minister intervene and make sure that all these wind farms give compensation to all parts of the sector?
Minister.
As Willie Rennie knows, the fisheries compensation is a private matter between the wind developers and the fishers. Scottish ministers have no regulatory or statutory mechanism for involvement in a leverage for such financial payments. But I'm quite sure if he writes to the Cabinet Secretary, she will pick that point up for him.
And supplementary, Tim Eagle.
A common theme, I think, in most of the answers today is we're talking, but we don't see any action. Fishermen are having the problem with spatial squeeze right here, right now, every single day, and they need some action. So when is this government going to actually act and put something in place rather than just talking?
Minister.
As usual, I will respond to Mr Eagle in such a way as to say that the talking will continue, because that's how you get resolutions and that's how it will happen.
Question number 8, Ash Regan.
To ask the Scottish Government what benefits it anticipates from the Land Reform Scotland Bill will deliver for rural and island communities, including in relation to breaking up concentrated land ownership and ensuring that the land is used in the public interest and communities are not locked out of the decision-making.
Minister.
Scotland has one of the most concentrated patterns of land ownership in the world, so the bill sets out ambitious proposals that will change how land is managed in our rural and island communities for the better. It will prohibit certain land sales over 1,000 hectares until ministers can consider the sustainability of local communities and require the owners of large land holdings to engage with local communities about how they use their land. It also includes measures to give greater protection and fairness to tenant farming, making it fit for the future.
Ash Regan.
Former MSP Andy Whiteman has called the current land reform bill the least ambitious ever introduced, saying that it creates new complexities, friction and conflict in the land market for no evident gain. Scotland can't afford a land reform bill that just tinkers around the edges while ignoring the harsh reality of concentrated land ownership. And rural communities are being locked out of housing and local economies as land and property are treated as investments. So will the government commit to ensuring that this bill releases land for genuinely affordable community-led housing and possibly self-builders, rather than adding bureaucracy and leaving local people behind?
Minister.
I would dispute the point that Ash Regan makes, because the bill will, for the first time in Scotland, give ministers powers to ensure that the public interest is considered, with more than 1,000 hectares of land being sold. Scottish ministers require land to be sold in lots, and those lots offered to different buyers, where they determined that this could make local communities more sustainable. The bill also seeks to empower communities with more opportunities to own land through introducing advance notice of certain sales from large land holdings of over 1,000 hectares. There are a number of different things in this land reform bill, and I'm quite sure that that's taking us forward in the journey towards proper land reform.
Supplementary, Alistair Allen.
Thanks to the radical action already taken on land reform by the Scottish Government, many community groups have been able to successfully purchase estates. Today there are 2 potential buyouts at different stages in my constituency, the Bays of Harris and Bernera. So can the Cabinet Secretary or the Minister say anything further about how the next phase of land reform legislation will further support community buyouts like these, particularly those on crofting land?
Minister.
Scotland has got a proud history of land reform since devolution, and I very much wish the communities of Mr Allen's constituency well in their potential buyouts. Alongside what I said in my original answer, the land reform bill will require greater transparency of land sales from large landholdings, so that local communities are informed of when land is to be sold and have greater opportunity to make a community right to buy application. The Government is also continuing further improvement to community rights to buy, and we introduced the Crofting Scottish Land Court Bill in June, which will give crofters and their communities a greater say in how the land they work is used.
And supplementary, Mercedes Piaba.
Thank you. Thanks to the campaigning efforts of the local community, the sale of Kinloch Castle on the Isle of Rum by Nature Scott will be subject to a public interest test applied to potential buyers. The Scottish Government's Kinloch Castle study found that the most important aspects of a sale were long-term contribution to the community, as well as to nature, sustainability, culture and the local economy. So given that study and the tenacity of the people of Rum, doesn't it make sense to include a public interest test on the buyers of land transactions in the Land Reform Scotland Bill?
Minister.
As I said, the land reform bill is currently going through the Parliament, and I'm quite sure that Mercedes Villalba will make that point to the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes portfolio questions on rural affairs, land reform and islands. There will be a very short pause before we move on to the next portfolio to allow frontbench teams to quickly change position. Thank you. Thank you. We will now move on to the next portfolio this afternoon, which is health and social care. And at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met with the Chair of NHS Grampian and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, President Officer. The Chair of NHS Grampian participated in the most recent meeting of NHS Grampian Assurance Board on the 23rd of September. The board, which provides oversight of NHS Grampian's improvement plan, comprises Scottish Government officials as well as NHS Grampian leaders. The agenda for that meeting included the financial position of the local system, engagement between NHS Grampian leaders and the local workforce, and improvement plans for unscheduled care.
Douglas Ross.
As an MSP, I regularly write to NHS Grampian, raising serious concerns on behalf of constituents. The board have now taken to responding to MSPs by saying they won't meet the 20-day target for a response. But it's not that they're not meeting it, they are missing it completely. Months are going past without getting any reply. I raised an issue on the 22nd of May with the Health Board. It was raised here in Parliament with the First Minister on the 5th of June, and we still got no response. In another case, I contacted NHS Grampian on the 29th of April. I've had a number of automatic responses to say they're still looking into it, but no reply. The constituent who I was advocating on behalf has now passed away. They've got no closure for the issue that they raised with their elected member in this Parliament. Does the Minister agree that is simply unacceptable? And what will he do to encourage NHS Grampian to fully respond to these serious concerns?
Cabinet Secretary.
Direct response to the question, yes, I do. I expect complaints or concerns that are raised with NHS boards, regardless if they're raised by elected members or indeed by individual patients, to be responded to timely, and for progress to be made in resolving the issues that have been made. There is a new Chief Executive that has just taken up post at NHS Grampian, Laura Scaife-Knight. She has been in post for just over a week, and I'll make sure that Mr Ross's concerns are raised with her around ensuring that there is better communication with elected members, because what he has raised with me just now, and I obviously pass on my sincere condolences to the family of Mr Ross's constituent, is not the standard that I would expect.
Supplementary, Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary's continued focus on NHS Grampian and the issues that it has been facing. It's vital that patients in my constituency receive the care they need when they need it. So can the Cabinet Secretary outline what work the Scottish Government has done and is doing to stabilise and support NHS Grampian to ensure that patients are able to move quickly through the system?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I fully agree with Karen Adam. The whole purpose of the escalation work with NHS Grampian is to ensure that local patients have access to responsive, high-quality, safe and sustainable services. To that end, we are providing enhanced scrutiny and support to ensure that the Health Board has robust improvement plans in place and effectively implements them. And the Governance Board's Assurance Board, which is overseeing this activity, will actively monitor the development and implementation of a number of NHS Grampian work strands, from improvements in the overall financial position to specific work around better patient flow, in line with the recommendations made in the independent diagnostic report over the summer. I am confident that through these actions we will soon have a clear plan to stabilise the system and set the right conditions for the necessary longer-term transformational work under the new Chief Executive.
Question number 2, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recourse is open to patients who have experienced complications following an NHS operation.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, any patient who experiences complications following surgery should discuss their concerns with the healthcare professionals responsible for their care. In addition, everyone has the right to make a complaint about the NHS treatment they have received, and their concerns should be addressed at a local level through the NHS complaint handling procedure. Where that is not possible, the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman is the second and final stage in that process.
Fulton McGregor.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Last week I met a constituent, Patrick Higgins, who underwent a routine operation. However, due to a nerve in his leg being accidentally severed, he now has severe mobility issues. Patrick feels he is being ignored by the health services involved in his care, who cannot give him clarity on why this complication occurred or on what can be done to address it. The Cabinet Secretary will know that I have written to him this week regarding this case, but can I ask what can be done to ensure that the NHS have policies in place to ensure that the least stressful and best outcomes for patients in what I understand is the very rare event of complications?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Fulton McGregor for raising this case both here and to me in writing. I'm very sorry to hear of Mr Higgins' situation, and I will of course provide a full response to his correspondence as soon as possible. No patient should be left in a position where they do not know what has happened following an adverse event. Where a board undertakes an adverse event review, the patient or their family should be kept fully informed throughout that process. Furthermore, the Patient Rights Scotland Act 2011 and supporting legislation provides a specific right for people to make complaints and places a duty on NHS boards to thoroughly investigate and respond to any concerns raised. If a person remains dissatisfied following the board's decision on their complaint, they can then ask the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman to consider that complaint.
Supplementary, Katie Clark.
My constituents Rosanna Clarkin and Lauren McDougall have a petition before the Petition Committee relating to complications arising from the use of surgical mesh by the NHS. The Scottish Government has previously indicated that they will monitor the progress of the new British Hernia Society register to gather more information about the scale of complications arising from the use of mesh in hernia repairs. I previously submitted freedom of information requests to health boards across Scotland and got some information from some health boards, but not from others. So, as well as the Hernia Society Register, will the Cabinet Secretary ensure that all health boards retain records on complications arising from the use of hernia mesh, and that this information is made available to inform decision-making?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Katie Clark for her advocacy on behalf of her constituents and for the work that her constituents have done through the Petitions Committee process. I appeared before the Petitions Committee last week, and I find it an excellent process through which members of the public can raise their concerns directly in Parliament. I think it's a very effective process. I know that the Minister for Public Health has met with Katie Clark on this matter, and I will consider the position that she has asked for and make sure that either myself or the Minister reply in writing.
Question number 3, Emma Roddick, who's joining us remotely.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its approach to considering a hypermobility pathway for healthcare in line with that being brought forward in Wales.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I can reassure members that the Scottish Government, through the Rare Disease Implementation Board and wider engagement, is continuing our commitment to improving the lives of people living with rare conditions and enabling resources to support clinicians. Guidance on assessment and referral for hypermobility is available on Healthcare Improvement Scotland's Right Decision Service. I'm aware that the Ehlers-Danlos Support UK have been working with NHS Wales to co-produce a national pathway for hypermobility disorders in Wales, and I'm waiting to see the outcome of this work and any learning that can be applied to Scotland. We will continue to implement our action plan to support people with rare conditions in Scotland.
Emma Roddick.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and as she knows, I've also been engaging with Ehlers-Danlos Support UK about the many cases that they've come across where folk have struggled to get access to a diagnosis and to treatment, often being bounced from one specialist to another without any conclusions, and I've appreciated her time to speak about this previously. Can she speak more to what resources have been allocated or are planned to be allocated for developing and implementing a pathway, whether or not it echoes that in Wales?
Minister. I thank Ms Roddick for her supplementary question and also the work that she's been doing to raise awareness with myself and also more widely within this Parliament around hypermobility conditions. As Ms Roddick knows, we have consulted on a long-term conditions framework, and I'm aware that representations have been made from the rare diseases community, and so this has been fed in. Their views will be captured in the review work, and allocation of resources will be determined in this work as this work progresses in line with the Scottish Parliamentary business work, budget work.
Question number 4, Carol Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the progress being made in developing the next phase of the Women's Health Plan.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've been speaking with women and girls, gathering evidence and consulting with interested organisations to develop the next phase of the Women's Health Plan. The first stage of the plan was completed in 2024, and we want to make sure that the next phase builds on its progress. Work has well progressed, I'm pleased to say, and I hope that the next phase will be published in January 2026.
Carol Mochan.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for that update and the way in which she keeps us all apprised of the plan. I know the Minister will be aware of the situation regarding maternity services in Wigtonshire and the concerns around last week's decision to keep services at the Galloway Community Hospital closed. This comes despite strong opposition from the Galloway Community Action Group, who fear that the closure puts mothers and babies at risk. The group have described current maternity care in Wigtonshire as like something out of the Middle Ages, and even the Patient Safety Commissioner, who met with the group only 2 weeks ago, feels that there is a gap in care here. Minister, women are fearful, so can I ask whether the Minister would join me and other interested parties in meeting with the group to listen to their concerns directly and hear the testimonies of some of the mothers affected?
Minister.
I thank Carol Mochan for her follow-up question and very much appreciate the dialogue that we've been able to have cross-chamber around the Women's Health Plan. I'm very aware of the situation with maternity services in Wigtonshire, having met with Finlay Carson and also Emma Harper with regards to this. Safety is the key concern, but I also have to remember that it's the IJBs that make these decisions. The Cabinet Secretary is due to meet with the Patient Safety Commissioner shortly, and ministers would be very happy to engage more with the community.
Supplementary, Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is deeply concerning that the UK Labour Government has been criticised by a coalition of charities who have said women are, and I quote, not a special interest group and are being deprioritised with targets cut in half and funding slashed south of the border. Now, a range of women's health issues regularly appear in my constituency casework. So can the Minister further outline how the Scottish Government is prioritising women's health and ensuring women are supported through this SNP Government's investment?
Minister.
Audrey Nicholl for her question and recognise an inbox that have got women's health issues in my own constituency as well. As we move to the next phase of the Women's Health Plan, we will continue to invest in women's health. We've provided £8.8 million to target long waits for gynaecology, £4 million to enhance to GP enhanced services supporting access to long-acting reversible contraception, £1.5 million for miscarriage care and £1 million each year to broaden access to cancer screening. And we've also invested over £21 million this financial year through the Delivering Equally Safe Fund to support women to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls. We will continue to do all in our power to seek the best outcomes for women's health and girls throughout their lives.
And supplementary, Annie Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 1,200 women were asked about the impact of the Women's Health Plan earlier this year, and 90% still had concerns about accessing comprehensive health screening for issues including diabetes, heart disease and female-specific issues. And many expressed feel that there is just not enough help for people suffering from the menopause in particular. What will be different about the next phase of the Women's Health Plan to ensure that concerns of women, including my constituents in Glasgow, are addressed?
Minister.
Annie Wells for her question and welcome her to her portfolio and joining the group where we have been sharing progress that has been made. I think it's really important to recognise that Scotland was the first of the 4 nations to produce a women's health plan, and we have a distance to go. We recognise that, but with the leadership that we have within the Scottish Government and also the cross-party support, let's not forget the amazing support of the women's health champion, Professor Anna Glazier. We are making a difference. We have been very clear to ensure that we're bringing women of all ages into the work with regards to the next phase of the Women's Health Plan, and I hope Annie Wells can welcome it, as I do, when it's launched, as I said, to Carol Mochan in January next year.
Question number 5, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what provisions are in place to support people in hospitals and care settings who have serious spinal injuries resulting in paralysis from the neck down.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Queen Elizabeth National Spinal Injuries Unit in Glasgow is responsible for the acute and lifelong care of all adult patients with traumatic and non-progressive spinal cord injury. We are committed to ensuring that all adults who require rehabilitation in all settings have timely access to the right services at the right time. The Once for Scotland rehabilitation approach sets out commitments that will shape a national programme of improvement work to which NHS boards are expected to demonstrate rehabilitation provision in a variety of settings, including inpatient and community settings, and at a range of intensities.
Christine Graham.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. My constituent, Graham Wright, suffered a freak accident last year. His spine was paralysed from the neck down. Sadly, he died recently, and while his wife had praise for the 3 months he spent in the spinal unit at the Queen Elizabeth in Glasgow, the planned transfer to Borders General Hospital exposed dreadful deficiencies in their ability to look after him, not even knowing initially how to use a hoist. Will the Cabinet Secretary meet with my constituent to hear her experience, as it's disturbing that in an area of rugby, horse riding and agriculture, where a spinal injury might not be so uncommon, that the appropriate training for spinal injuries appears lacking in the local hospital?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm very grateful to Christine Graham for raising this case, and I'm very sorry to hear of Mr Wright's passing and offer my sincere condolences to his family for their loss. I know personally of the truly remarkable specialist care that is provided at the Spinal Injuries Unit at the Queen Elizabeth, because my father was a patient, and I'm concerned by what Christine Graham has raised regards Borders General. I expect NHS boards to provide high-quality, person-centred care and support for all people, and so it is always disappointing to hear of instances where that care has fallen short of the standard expected. I hope Christine Graham will understand and appreciate that it would not be appropriate for me to comment on individual cases. However, I would welcome a discussion to better understand the circumstances, and so I invite her to write to me with further details so that we may arrange for a meeting to explore them fully.
Question number 6, Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to support NHS Dumfries and Galloway in addressing financial pressures.
Cabinet Secretary.
Following NHS Dumfries and Galloway's escalation for finance, the Scottish Government has provided increased oversight and engagement, ensuring the board is provided support commensurate to its financial circumstances. So far, this includes a whole clinical services review, which remains ongoing. This involves close collaboration between NHS Dumfries and Galloway and Scottish Government to identify changes to NHS Dumfries and Galloway's models of care to improve sustainability whilst protecting patient outcomes. In addition, NHS Dumfries and Galloway have received £7.4 million out of additional funding to support their financial position.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and obviously any additional money is welcome, but with a record deficit of £58 million predicted by the Health and Social Care Partnership for 25-26, the financial position continues to deteriorate, and there are real concerns locally about the impact of drastic reductions in spending. And there is concern in communities that fundamentally it will not be possible to save that sum without reducing services, leaving rural communities even more isolated, and cost pressures are starting to dictate services rather than seeing those patient-led services he talks about.
Cabinet Secretary.
I do expect when we have situations like this that we move to a position where we have sustainable but clearly patient-serving services that ensure that they are meeting the needs of the population that they're serving. Yes, there are going to be difficult decisions that are required to be taken across not just our health services but public services in general, because of the corrosive impact that years of high inflation have had on our spendability, as well as the demand that is coming through. That's why it's so important that the likes of the population health framework that we've set out, shifting the balance of care and reforming our health and social care services to reduce demand and to be able to more directly address demand is so important, and I'll continue to work with NHS Dumfries and Galloway, with Julie White, to ensure that is the case in Dumfries and Galloway as it is elsewhere.
Question number 7, Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the potential impact on Scotland's dentistry sector of the UK Labour Administration's recent changes to the skilled worker visa.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Home Office changes to skilled worker visas mean that dental care professionals such as therapists, hygienists, technicians and nurses are no longer supported. According to the General Dental Council, over 1/5 of new applicants in 2024 were from non-UK backgrounds. This is over 2,000 workers. It's clearer than ever that the UK Government is not interested in the needs of Scotland's healthcare sector when it comes to migration. I am sure that the member will agree that the only way Scotland can create the immigration system it needs is with full powers as an independent country.
Jackie Dunbar.
I thank the Minister for that answer and totally agree. It is clear that the UK Labour Government are determined to lurch even more to the right than even the Tories did when in power when it comes to immigration. This is having a hugely damaging impact on constituencies like mine who rely on skilled workers in health and social care. So can I ask the Minister what assessment harmful Labour policies are having on the wider health and social care sector, such as dentistry, and will she join me in calling for the repeal of this damaging policies by this reckless Labour UK Government?
Minister.
I thank Jackie Dunbar for her question, and I would like to let the Chamber know that I have already written to Stephen Kinnock, the Minister of State for Care, in August to highlight our concerns at a time of continued pressure on the dental workforce. This decision by the UK Labour Government will have consequences for hard-working people who make such a valuable contribution to our communities and our healthcare system. The Scottish Government will continue to call on the UK Government to reverse these proposals. They have not worked with us on bringing forward a Scottish visa or on a Scottish graduate visa route, despite repeated asks. We are clear that Scotland should have an immigration system that meets Scotland's economic and demographic needs. And of course, the best way we could do this is for Scotland to be an independent country.
Supplementary, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Minister will be aware that over 300 dentists have taken early retirement since 2020, at the same time as 36,000 patients have been forced to go private. It's clear the funding model still isn't working. The Scottish Dental Association report that 9 out of 10 dentists say the NHS is not an attractive place to build and maintain a career, and that further reform is needed. So will the Government listen to them and stop more dentists leaving the NHS and ensure our rural areas are not left as dental deserts?
Minister.
I thank Brian Whittle for his follow-up question. As I made clear in November 2 years ago, when we introduced the new payment system for dentists, which I have to say has been welcomed by dentists, that was the start of a journey. And we are talking about governance and training, and we have invested more in this budget, which I would point out that the Conservatives didn't support, in dental investment. So we are moving along with the dentists, who I would like to thank for the work that they do to ensure that Scotland's teeth health is as good as it can be. Can we do more? Yes. Are we doing that? Yes.
Supplementary, Billy Rennie.
But the Minister's not living in reality. The reality is that we're losing dentists from the NHS. The Cooper dentist is on an emergency service only, and it's been like that for months. We've lost dentists in Newborough, in Leven, in Glenrothes, in many parts of Fife. People just simply cannot get treatment. She has to accept, surely, that the payment review that she introduced in November 2023 just isn't working. When is she going to get back to reality?
Minister.
Thank Willie Rennie for his question, and I am living in reality. The conversations that I have had with a number of dentists show that they are pleased with the funding change that we brought in 2 years ago. As I said to Mr Whittle, do we have to do more? Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we have one hand tied behind our back when the UK Government changes visa allowances for us to come into the country to ensure that we have got the right dental teams in the country. We are also investing in education to open up more places for dentists in Scotland. And I would also point out that NHS Fife has been taking benefit from the SDAIs to ensure that more dentists are able to open up practices there, and that is a conversation that I have regularly with NHS Fife.
And brief supplementary, Paul Sweeney, who's joining us remotely. Mr Sweeney. We do one last call for Paul Sweeney. Mr Sweeney, are you there? Yes, could we have a brief supplementary? Mr Sweeney, a brief supplementary now. We've lost a bit of time.
Well, we know, Deputy Presiding Officer, the problems with NHS dentistry are primarily caused by dentists leaving the NHS to go private, and that the Scottish Government's response to this has been to promise to train roughly 10 extra dentists a year, while hundreds of migrant dentists are unable to actually work as NHS dentists because of the huge waiting lists to access the conversion training. So will the Minister stop blaming the Government over a marginal dispute on skilled worker visas and actually take responsibility for creating an effective training and retention plan?
Minister
Sweeney for his question, but would like to politely point out to him that the waiting list for dentists from international countries to sit the examinations is down to reserved powers. Your Minister...
Always through the chair.
Sorry, my apologies. The Minister for State for Care made a decision not to follow up with that, a request that we and the other devolved nations had made. So I would call on Mr Sweeney to write to Mr Kinnock to try and persuade him of the need to get more dentists into this country.
And I can squeeze in question number 8. I need brief questions and brief responses. Ros McCall.
To ask the Scottish Government to respond to alcohol-specific deaths in Scotland remaining above 1,000 for the 12th year in a row.
Minister Marie Todd.
So the first thing to say in response is behind those figures are individuals who have lost their lives, families who are in mourning and communities who are feeling the loss of them. The number of alcohol-specific deaths fell by 7% to 1,185 in 2024. That's the lowest since 2019. Now, that decrease is very welcome, but we know the number of deaths remains far too high, and all of them are preventable. The Scottish Government is committed to tackling alcohol harm, with over £160 million allocated to alcohol and drug initiatives and services in 25-26. Last year, we increased our world-leading minimum unit pricing policy to 65p. We've expanded access to treatment, including residential rehabilitation. As a refreshed alcohol and drug strategic plan develops, I'll continue to act guided by evidence to reduce harm and to support those affected.
Ros McCall.
Any fall in deaths is welcome, but Alcohol Focus Scotland are saying that the level of death is appallingly high and more than double the level of 30 years ago. In response to this, the Minister said in an interview last week that she was considering increasing alcohol prices annually in line with inflation. So can the Minister confirm if this is government policy? And rather than doubling down on tax on hard-working Scots even more, why won't the Government take a positive approach, back our right to recovery bill at stage 1 next week, and enshrine in law the right for treatment for those struggling with alcohol addiction?
Minister, briefly, please.
So the minimum unit pricing policy is really significant, and it is world-leading. It is vitally important that the minimum unit price is uprated on a regular basis to ensure that it is impactful. What I said in the interview last week was that I thought that it is a reasonable idea to consider whether it can be automatically uprated. I am sure although the formula would be hotly contested and debated, it would be a useful thing to do. That is not yet government policy. We are considering how to proceed with that. But undoubtedly, as the prices of everything increase, the minimum unit price will need to increase. On the right to recovery, we'll have that debate at stage 1 next week. I recognise that the Parliament has had its say in terms of the committee report, and the committee cannot commend it to Parliament because there are so many flaws in that bill. But we will certainly listen to the debate and make our position clear next week.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes portfolio questions on health and social care. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business to allow frontbench teams to change positions should they so wish. Thank you.